take these children. They can take these children from parents in Latin America, Central America, South America. They could take these children and bring them to the border, tell the child, hey, you're going to go across the border by yourself. You're going to identify yourself as an unaccompanied minor. And when you're processed by Border Patrol, you're going to be given to what's called the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is.
And actually, can I pause you right there? There was a news article that now the media is actually, acknowledging certain aspects of these unaccompanied children crossing the border. Sometimes they're unaccompanied, or sometimes they're walking across with their parents, but they have been identified as being drugged with melatonin, Benadryl, so that they're drowsy and they can't actually tell Border Patrol agents that these are or are not my parents. And the DNA testing has been pulled back as a policy.
That's
so
true.
We can't validate or confirm that these are their parents. But to your point, if they walk across the border completely unaccompanied, just dropped off, they check in with the processing center, and then did you want to finish?
Yep. So can you explain, like, how do they identify where they're going, like who they want to be their sponsor?
So it's interesting to take a step back. You had mentioned about their identification. When you and I were at the border, we saw plenty of IDs, just thrown throughout. And we asked ourselves, why would they get rid of their identifications? I mean, if they have a criminal background, that's more of an incentive to get rid of their identifications. But why would everyone be getting rid of their identifications? And when we had spoken to that former trafficker, they said that there are vans, there are setups where these cartels and gangs are set up to immediately print off new birth certificates, new passports, new identifications. And the motivation for that is, one, if they come from a special interest country. I mean, we saw IDs, Jarrod, of people from China, Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, and these are countries that are known to have terroristic activity. And so if they want to make sure that they get through the border without a problem, they're going to make sure that they change their identification to no longer identify them as being from a country that has terrorism.
To that point, when you and I were down on the border, this is the passport that we picked up. This is the passport of a 5-year-old Colombian child. And to articulate where we picked this up at, it was along the border route, along the smuggling and trafficking route that is completely cartel controlled. This child did not go through that without the cartel being paid. It's murder. It's a death sentence if you try to go through there without the blessing of the cartel, which the blessing comes through paying them. And so when you and I were on the border and we were walking, it was an area where the border wall had ended. And it was an area where the border wall had ended. And we're walking, and you and I found this passport. And I remember you and I opening it up together and seeing the face of this beautiful 5-year-old child, 5-year-old little girl. And you and I had a discussion that, we can't, save the world. We can't save all the children, but to that one child that we're able to find, that we may be able to, to give the world back to that child. And you and I made a commitment that we were going to work hard to find this child. And what that looked like in the coming weeks was we reached out to Interpol, because we do a lot of work together with Interpol in Colombia. And they did some research and investigation, and they found out that the child did not have the required parental consent to leave Colombia. And, that really raised the alarm for us. From there, we worked with many different organizations. We worked with organizations that go onto the dark web, that go onto the internet to do biometric facial recognition to see if this child's being sold for sex, see if this child is being sold for illegal adoption. We worked with HSI, which is Homeland Security Investigations. And ultimately, long story short, about a month ago, we were able to locate this child in Oklahoma City. And today this child is safe. And, I'm hesitant to give too many details in terms of the name and the specifics related to the child, because the cartel is involved. But the reason why I bring this story up is that this is a success story.
she's safe, but we don't know. And we did find out that she had crossed with her mom, but we don't know the things that they encountered along the way. They're safe now, but like Alan from Peru and some of the other stories that you mentioned, what are the things, the horrors that they encountered along their way? And the reason why it's important to us in the United States is it's being funded by your tax dollars. Like, these programs are being paid for by you and I, our hard work. We go out, we work, we try to provide for our families, we pay our taxes. And then those tax dollars go to programs like HHS, Health and Human Services, Office of Refugee Resettlement, unaccompanied children program, where they're running it into the ground and we're paying for it. And they've done audits, they've done inspections on these programs. And I mean, the newest figure that came out was that 325,000 children are unaccounted for. That's absolutely unacceptable. I mean, you're a parent, I'm a parent. One child unaccounted for is one child too many, but 325,000 children, that's absolutely abhorrent, unacceptable. And as we're leading into this election in a few days, regardless of where you stand on politics, look at the policies. Look at the policies that each administration, prior administrations, current administrations, look at those policies and see which ones actually help facilitate this human trafficking operation that we're seeing, and which ones actually push back and stop those operations.
Great points. So I wouldn't have fully understood what you're talking about a year ago until I saw it with my own eyes. And this is what I saw. Was I learned that in the last 4 years, there have been 500,000 unaccompanied children that have been sent to the border. These children are sent there by the cartels. Let there be no mistake about it. You don't go through the border without the cartel's blessing. And so 500,000 children have been sent to the border. So what they do is they are given the names, addresses, and phone numbers of who they are to request to be their sponsor by the cartel. And it's all part of this trafficking network, right? So the child has to work off the debt for being brought to the United States. The way that the child works off that debt is by going into the United States and doing some work in deplorable conditions, whether it's sex trafficking or working in for 18 hours a day in a poultry factory or, a restaurant. And they work to pay off this debt. And the cartels realized that whenever we let the contract expire to do DNA testing, and that Office of Refugee Resettlement is not doing meaningful background checks, is not doing meaningful vetting, the cartels, again, always one step ahead of the government, has realized that they can exploit these children, that they can make a tremendous profit from these children by telling these children where to go once they're processed at the border. And I would emphasize, this is not on the hands of Border Patrol. Border Patrol is just a processing agency. This is at the hands of Health and Human Services, Office of Refugee Resettlement, which I don't say this lightly. I don't say this without being fact-based and being able to back this up. But it could be argued that what is going on at the border involving these children and sending them to unvetted sponsors that are ultimately trafficking these children to the cartels, which you and I could prove case after case after case. You mentioned about children being sent to MS-13, children being sent to empty fields. This is happening. Our government is sending these children into trafficking situations. It's not a question. It's not my opinion. It's a fact. We're able to back that up. And in fact, we're going to be testifying again before I testified to it in July before the Senate. You're going to be testifying in a couple of weeks before the United States Congress. And we are going to lay out the facts that our government is sending these children into sex trafficking operations throughout the United States. And again, it's not an opinion. It's a fact. I don't think it. I know it. So, this is occurring And if you told me that a year ago, I probably wouldn't have believed you, but I've seen it now with my own eyes, and it's truly going on. And it is a lack of accountability, and someday they'll be held accountable. But you know, what is going on is costing the lives of these children. You said something important a second ago about the experience of these people coming to the United States. I talked to an individual, and I consider him a good friend. I've known him for years, and I met him in the prison setting in Central America. He was a prison officer there, and he contacted me one day, and he said, "I'm in the United States now." And I said, "Oh, great. How'd you get here?" And he said, "Well, I was smuggled." I said, "Well, that's not the right thing to do, but tell me about your experience." And he explained that it was so horrifying that him and his smuggling group, led by the cartel, were stepping over the skeletal remains of adults and children, wondering if they died of starvation or of murder, because those are two threats that he and his group were facing. These are the realities of what's going on. And one thing that you've done, Allie, that I'm so proud of you about, is going into, as a Hispanic female, you've gone into the Latin American media and talked about the dangers, and it's so important. Can you elaborate on what you're doing in terms of creating that awareness and why that's important?
Yeah, so it originated from the question from other mothers, like, how could any mother let their child go on this harrowing journey alone? Who would send their kids out to cross the border, go on that long stretch, that long journey? I mean, Jarrod, you've done the research on how long it takes from some of these Central American countries to reach all the way to one of the border entry points in the United States. It's a long, harrowing journey, even for an adult, never mind a child. And so we kept getting questions from parents. Why would parents let their kids cross? Why would their parents let their children go with these smugglers, these coyotes? And the only answer that I actually gave on a podcast recently was that they're being manipulated. And the majority of these parents that are letting their children go by themselves are being manipulated into thinking that this is a journey, that there's other children going on it. It's being glamorized. Like, yes, we're going to take care of everything. Just, here's the flat fee. We'll take your child from point A to point B. You can decide which sponsor that you want us to deliver them to. And very rarely does that actually happen the way that they say it's going to happen. There's increasing costs. They don't mention anything about trafficking the child, any exploitation that occurs along the way, and the fact that most children aren't actually delivered to the sponsor that the parent wants them to be delivered to. They're delivered to the sponsor the cartel tells them to go to. So when you get these questions about how are the parents either okay with it or why are they sending them there? They either don't know, or it's like that mother in that NGO shelter where the children were literally ripped from her arms. So there's only one or two options, that they either don't know or that they're being kidnapped from these parents. And both options are happening.
That's a great point. And so one thing that unfortunately you and I've come across is the fact is there's a market for organs. And you and I were in the prison a few weeks ago now, 2 months ago, and you and I sat across the desk from a Jalisco New Generation Cartel member, and he opened up about the organ harvesting market. And what saddened me the most from that discussion that you and I had with him is that it is buyers from the United States that are going to Mexico to purchase these organs. And in a different interview that we did, we spoke to somebody that had inside information about the harvesting of organs involving children. And organ trafficker, his nickname is Turco, which is a Colombian nickname for criminal. And he goes into migrant shelters and camps and takes children. And the last organ that we're aware of that he harvested was the right eye of a 12-year-old for $15,000 in Mexico. These things are happening. I know it's ugly. I know nobody wants to talk about it, but it's an important discussion. What can you tell us about organ harvesting?
I would say that it's really prevalent. I would say that movies like The Sound of Freedom really woke everyone up to trafficking, whether it's sex, labor, organ. But what it didn't do, and it did a great job, but what it didn't do is it didn't educate people that that trafficking is happening in the United States as well. A lot of people that watched it thought it's some far off country, it's some Latin American country. It's not happening here. It is happening here. And you mentioned the US is a strong buyer in organs. We all know as a organ is needed, the organ donor list is extremely long. And if you're given, you know, a report from your doctor that you only have X amount of time to live unless you get this organ, or your child, or your spouse, your loved one, a family member. We asked one of the people that we interviewed, and the former trafficker, and he said, guys, I know as a parent that many people would struggle with the fact that you would do anything to save the life of your child. And so organ trafficking is a really hard conversation to have, because sometimes people know that the organ that they're buying is trafficked, and sometimes they don't know. They're just paying to expedite an organ, and they're not really asking the questions on where it's coming from. Mm-hmm. So being that Trish is delivering a podcast on wellness, and if there's doctors, nurses, healthcare practitioners out there, Jarrod and I would suggest that you ask the questions if you're dealing an organ, or if you actually encounter a woman that looks battered or frazzled, or a child, girls, boys. If something doesn't look right, make sure that you do the due diligence and take the extra step to ask a question, because it could be domestic abuse, but it also could be trafficking, situations of trafficking. Each one of us are unique in our backgrounds and the skills that we bring. Medical professionals, you guys have a unique opportunity to get these victims alone, because a lot of these appointments are done in the privacy with the patient and the doctor. And so you have a isolated opportunity to ask the questions that need to be asked.
And I know we're getting close on time, but just
we're okay. I'll just break it up into 2 modules. It's good. We'll keep on going.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So perfect. Yeah, great points. So Allie is testifying for the United States Congress for the Committee on Homeland Security, the Congressional Committee on Homeland Security, on November 19th. And I encourage everyone to listen to that. All you have to do is just Google Congressional Committee on Homeland Security. Their website will come up. The live link to where Allie will be testifying will appear. And you know, it's going to be a continued discussion on what we're talking about. It's going to be Allie and I's firsthand research on the border in Central America, where we have seen firsthand trafficking, smuggling, talk to cartel members, talk to traffickers. And that's powerful information. And I know that it's, you know, that it's sometimes difficult. And sometimes I know that the weight of what we've shared today can feel like there's no hope. But as long as we're willing to fight, there is hope. And, you know, while we have people that care about children and that care about what's going on to these trafficking victims, as long as we have those people that care, as long as we have people that want to get involved, there's still hope. And everyone can get involved in counter-human trafficking. It looks different for everyone. You know, it looks different based on what you do for a living. It looks different based on where you live, but everyone has a role in combating human trafficking. And Allie, can you just share with us briefly, you know, what that looks like for the average everyday person in terms of combating trafficking?
Yeah, so I'm a mom. I work full time, aside from the work that I do with Dr. Sadulski and the human trafficking efforts. But everyone can do something. Like I mentioned earlier, our unique backgrounds, our unique skill sets. We can each do something, but it starts with acknowledging that there's a problem. The first step is acknowledging that something is wrong. And when we acknowledge it, our eyes start to open. And Trish, I think you had mentioned this offline, that we just need to open our eyes. If that's the only thing that we do, the only thing is just open your eyes And when you see something that doesn't sound right, that doesn't feel right or look right, that you say something, you report it to your local authorities. That's the first step, is reporting it, making sure that there's eyes on the ground, and that these traffickers, these smugglers don't feel like they're roaming around our streets scot-free because no one's going to do anything about it.
What would they do? Get a license plate and turn that in? What would we look for?
If you see something,
Mhm.
I would say get as many, I mean, Jarrod can speak to this, but